welcome. Yay. If you feel comfortable being on camera, we of course love to see the faces, but of course, take care of yourself. Welcome to NET's Inspiration on Demand, Creators in Conversation. We're so happy to be back in community with folks today. It's our monthly series here. I'm Patricia Garza, Director of Programs and Engagement here at NET. I'm a Latinx human with kind of short hair. It's getting much longer now, with purple cat-eye glasses. And today I'm wearing a beige shirt that looks a little bit like paint splatter with red and blues and black and white. It's very festive and fun for Friday. I prefer they, them pronouns, but I also accept she, her, hers verbally. I want to take a moment and always start by acknowledging the indigenous peoples and the traditional stewards of the land on where I live, but across the country where you all are as well, here on Turtle Island. And I'm zooming in personally from Tongva Quiche land in East Los Angeles, California. So it's morning for me. I have my little morning tea here. And if you would like to participate in a land acknowledgement today, please do so in the chat. We would love to see where everybody is zooming from. We will also drop a link in the chat if you want to engage and you need a resource to engage. I also want to acknowledge my amazing colleagues from NET who are here today, and they will be in the chat. They'll be helping out with some tech. Alicia Tonzik, our executive director, and then Nicole Shiro, our finance and operations manager. Thank you to both of my colleagues for being here. I also just want to do a quick access and logistics check-in. So access needs, we are recording this for future viewing, and they will be up on our YouTube. I'd like to try to put them up either later today or first thing on Monday, depending on processing. The chat is enabled, so please react, have conversations, but just be mindful that we do download the chat after and we can see everything. I just like to give people those warnings. If you have a need for closed captioning, we should see captions running across the bottom there. If it's distracting to you, you can also turn them off where it says live transcript on the bottom banner there, or turn them, if it's not showing up for you, you can turn them on. If you're having any issues, just put it in the chat and we'll help you out. And then we will be encouraging folks to go into speaker view, so that way Todd and Andre can really be seen today. That's in your upper right corner with your view speakers. So I just wanted to give those few things to get you started. Before we begin, I do want to take a moment and just name that there's been a lot of big news and events that are continuing to impact us in an already really hectic year. So I just thought maybe we could just take a breath together just to start us off. And just in particular, I want to, before we take our breath, I just want to take a moment and lift up the verdict announced in the trial for the murder of George Floyd, and send love and support to not only George Floyd's family, but the whole community, as his presence is still missed from their lives daily, even with this guilty verdict. This move forward in accountability is still a moment to check in with ourselves and our communities about continuing the work towards liberation. The work continues. And we're going to put in the chat the official Black Lives Matter response to the verdict, as well as there's a link in that response to the official George Floyd Memorial Foundation, and you can see the incredible work they're doing in George's memory. So before we begin, let's give ourselves a moment and a beat to just anchor ourselves back into the work in our communities. So on 3, 1, 2, 3, inhale and exhale. We're here together today. Thank you for being here. So why are we here? That's the question, right? A short reminder. This is our new series. You know, this is our third in a series. It's our NET's 25th birthday, I like to say, this year. And so we wanted to create space to get a spark of inspiration wherever you need it. Live, like you all here today, maybe on demand later on YouTube. We co-created this series with our incredible board members. Big shout out to Todd for really actually sparking the entire series. So give Todd credit, in hopes that we can offer a gift of inspiration to you all not just, today, but throughout the year. We pose this question to our board. Who are your mentors? Who are the artists you admire that inform and activate your own ensemble practice? So those were the questions we asked, and we're getting these beautiful gifts in response. And just announced on an e-blast, our May series will feature board member Carlos Alexis Cruz in conversation with Rosa Luisa Marquez, amazing Puerto Rican artist. So please tune in. That's on May 28th. So now for the main event. I want to give plenty of time here. So I'm going to give a very extremely condensed bio of these two amazing, incredible artists that we have here today, just in case you're not familiar with their work. But this is very abridged, people. So, just to say, so a huge welcome to our guest today, André Gregory, who has been directing in New York for more than half a century. He's collaborated on the film versions of his theater productions with Wallace Shawn, Louis Ma, and Jonathan Demme. Gregory, Shawn, and Ma created the now legendary My Dinner with André, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about. Gregory is also an actor, a writer, a teacher, and a painter. So I want to hear about that as well. And of course, Net's own board member, Todd London's books include An Ideal Theater, The Importance of Staying Earnest, and his most recent novel, If You See Him, Let Me Know. An artistic director, educator, essayist, theater chronicler. He is the winner of George Jean's Nathan Award for Dramatic Criticism and was the inaugural recipient of Theater Communications Group Visionary Leadership Award for his contributions to the American theater. And we are so grateful to have Todd on our board and to be leading us today. So Todd, I pass the baton to you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Hi, everybody. I just want to echo Patricia's invitation, if you feel comfortable, to show yourselves so we can see you and we can sort of be here together. Of course, it's okay if you don't want to be on video. How to begin? So André and I have just published this book here. It's called This Is Not My Memoir. And it was the result of I would say a 6 or 7 year collaborative process that is maybe not too unlike what those of you who build work together go through. And I want to acknowledge, in a sense, lineage here, because one of the things that has been very much on my mind during these years is how much the work André and his peers did and have done and continue to do was really the foundation for NET and for so much of the work that those of you who are doing work in ensemble now do. And I first became aware of this. It's so nice to see that Wendy Knox is here from Minneapolis. Wendy and I went to school together in Iowa, and our teacher there, Sandy Moffett, introduced us to the work of André Gregory and the Manhattan Project, because he had come the year before I got there. He had come from a summer with the Manhattan Project, and then they came to visit, and that was my introduction to André. And now here we are, 47 years later. Crazy. And the conversation really continues. So we're part of this lineage, and I want to acknowledge that. And I just love that fact so much. So hi, André.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon for us. It's good to see you here. Let's talk a little bit about, I want to focus, because we're in a group of theater makers and in this lineage that we talked about, I want to focus mostly on the theater making today. You know, the book is full of your amazing stories about your childhood, about the family sort of fleeing Russia, fleeing Germany, fleeing Paris, fleeing London, and coming to the States, and life in both New York and Hollywood here. But I really want to
we also almost fled the United States during the last election. We were looking at real estate in Montreal.
Yes, it continues. Let's definitely get to that. Yeah. So, but I want to focus a lot on the roots and on the Manhattan Project work and the work with the Polish Theater Lab and everything for obvious reasons today. And then everything else, and leave lots of time for questions. So let's just start. Can you just talk a little bit about like how you got into theater in the first place? Like what led you into this ridiculous profession?
Well, from the age of 14, I wanted to be an actor. As you can tell from the book in more detail, I was a total failure as an actor. I was not accepted at drama schools. I was told I had no talent. I was kicked out of acting classes. And, I had a wife and 2 kids. And I said to myself that if I didn't make it by the age of 30, I'd become a rabbi or a psychiatrist. And at 29, I directed a play, and it sort of worked. So it wasn't brilliant, but it wasn't bad.
What was
and so
that?
I do PS 193 by David Rayfield, who wrote some of the biggest war blockbusters in Hollywood history when he went from off-Broadway to 20th Century Fox. And, there's an interesting story in that because the reviews were almost all awful. I think we got one decent review from the New Yorker, and because I've always felt with Harry Truman, he was president, in case you're too young to remember. I always felt the buck stops here. So I kept thinking, there's something I could have done. Is there something I should have done to make this play a success? And then after a while, I stopped feeling guilty. 10 years later, I was in a tacky motel in LA. I woke up at 3 a.m. and I had the answer. And I called David, the author, and he said, wow, that would have been great. The lesson of that, I think, is that if we sometimes feel we're not working enough, we're not producing enough, artists, I think, are always working. Just as in winter, you can't see the flowers growing or the vegetables growing, but we know that underground they are. So don't give up if you think nothing's happening. People like us, it's always happening.
Yeah.
What was your question?
Oh, about starting out in the theater, and you sort of started, and I can goad you along some more unless something occurs.
No, I can go. No, I worked as a producer, as a stage manager, as a production stage manager. I felt that if you're going to direct, you have to be like the captain of a ship. You have to know how absolutely everything below deck works. I also didn't have much faith in myself as an actor or as a director, but I think those years as a stage manager were essential.
Yeah. So,
and then, of course, as a director,
yeah.
Never ask me a question. I don't stop.
I've been asking you questions for the last 17 years.
You've asked excellent questions. Now I don't even know what I was going to say.
Oh, you were on the ship as the captain, having to know everything, and
yeah.
Then,
well, let's go on.
Let's go on from there. Okay, so so that work is happening, but at a certain point, you decide you're going to become a director. You go kind of accidentally to the Berliner Ensemble. You want to talk a little bit about that early influence of Brecht?
I think I would say read the book.
It's one of my favorite chapters, actually.
It is a great chapter, yeah. And it's kind of complex. That's a little complex to talk about in a brief period of time. But Brecht, Strasberg, and Grotowski were certainly the 3 major influences on my work, and father figures.
Yeah. Well, let's come back to Grotowski in a minute. So I want to kind of get to the Manhattan Project, but I don't think it's good to go right there. So can you just talk briefly about the 3 theaters that you founded and or were part of founding and sort of trashed before you got to the
Yeah,
ensemble work?
I was the co-founder with Stuart Vaughan of the Seattle Repertory Theater. And Seattle was so far away in those days that if you went to a restaurant and ordered a martini, they served it with a cherry. And I started the Philadelphia Theater of the Living Arts in an African-American, well, I guess they would have called it then a slum. Did I start something else? I think I did.
Well, you were part of the Inner City Cultural Center in
LA. Yeah. And in 3 of the biggest scandals of that time, I got kicked out of my own 3 theaters and even arrested by the police. The nice thing about that, there's always a sunny side to everything. Who is that great storyteller? Swimming to Cambodia.
Oh, Spalding.
Spalding. Yeah, I met Spalding a few times, and he told me that when he was at there's a theater school in Chicago or in the Midwest.
The Goodman? Was it the Goodman?
The Goodman. Yeah, he was at the Goodman. He was bored to death. He hated the classes, and he was sort of deciding that he wouldn't go into theater. He'd go into something else. And then he read the story of my being arrested by the police in my own theater and put into a paddy wagon and taken out of town. And he thought, oh, maybe that's fun. Maybe the theater
for me.
Fun. Yeah, so it inspired him to stay in the theater.
Okay, let's get to that story. I think you should tell the story. You're talking about Philadelphia Theater of the Living Arts, and you're talking about the production of Becklek, right? Can you talk a little bit about that production and what led to your arrest and removal from the state of Pennsylvania?
Well, you know me, I'm a blabbermouth. If you've seen my dinner with Andre, I can't describe anything quickly.
Bring it.
2 actors, George Bartenieff and Crystal Field, brought me a play called Becklek that was about a sort of suburban conservative housewife who has a very dissatisfied life sexually with her husband. And she imagines that she's gone to an Africa of the mind, a surreal Africa, where she can let all of her appetites flow freely. So she starts killing natives, having sex with natives, eating natives. This was the 60s. And when our middle-class blue-haired ladies would walk into the theater, instead of going into the theater, there were 3 Watusis. Do you know what Watusis are?
You were, yes, but yeah, go ahead. Explain.
3 huge African Americans who would lead the audience down the dark alley into the theater. When you came into the theater, there was a totem pole covered with condoms filled with grape juice, and you were given a hatchet. And when you broke open the condom and the blood flowed, you were given a mask, an African mask, and you walked onto the stage and into the theater. The stage was no longer a stage. It was a series of mud pits crossed with little boardwalks. We were creating our own Africa. And because there were supposed to be corpses on the stage, I talked to one of our corporate sponsors and asked him if he had a chemist who could create smells. I told you this wouldn't be short.
No, this is good. And that was what, that was like Smith Kline. That was some pharmaceutical company, right?
Who remembers?
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And they sent a chemist to the theater. He had a little vial of glass. And he said, he'd asked, do you want animal smells or human smells? And I said, both if possible. And so he said, just drop 3 little drops into your air cooling system, and this will create the effect you wanted. We waited and we waited, and suddenly a stage manager ran off stage and vomited. 2 actors ran off stage and vomited. These 3 drops had permeated the entire upholstery of the chairs of the theater, and we had to postpone the opening, I think by a week. And when we were supposed to open, I came to the theater and found that the ASPCA had closed the theater down because the Haitian musicians had been sacrificing a goat for good luck every night, a live goat, and spreading its blood on the back walls of the theater. Does anyone out there have any doubt why I was taken out in a paddy wagon? There are a lot more details. It's a great story. In the book, you can read exactly what happened. But after that, I couldn't get a job as a dog catcher. Well, I did get one job, as you remember. I got a job directing a play on Broadway, the only one I've ever done, about bestiality, called Leda Had a Little Swan. And it closed the night before it opened, making Broadway history. I think it's the only play that's ever done that.
Great. This is a perfect setup, because I do have a question that I don't know that we've really discussed I mean, we've discussed it, I'm sure, but it's not fresh in my mind. So Beckluck is one of an example, and for everybody else who's here, I mean, Andre's early work, which was actually simultaneous with the rise of regional theater and was part of regional theater, Theater of the Living Arts being one of them, Seattle Rep obviously being one of them. It was often touted as the kind of wunderkind work of this new burgeoning theater, that here was this young, angry, mad genius, ready to like go to all extremes to frighten the blue hairs, as he said, out of the house. And Beckluck is this perfect example. You have this surrealist, sexual, colonialist fantasy that's going on in the theater. But one of the things, Andre, that I really wanted to ask you about, because Leda Had a Little Swan comes after this. You flame out of these theaters with these extravagant, highly sensational productions. And then, as someone who saw the work of the Manhattan Project, specifically Alice in Wonderland, it is actually nothing like that. It's stripped down. It's built over several years. It's almost the opposite. It's there's this book that really interests me about young geniuses and old masters, and it's actually a book about fine art, visual art, by a guy named David Gallinson, and he talks about the young genius, the kind of Picasso who conceives of a whole project and then executes it, as opposed to the Cezanne who keeps working the same themes, the same work over the course of a lifetime, and has to at every point sort of let go of the work. And it's like truly experimental, and it only finds its form in maturity. But it seems to me that you actually shifted modes, that you started as this kind of young, almost conceptual artist who would build these extravagant things. And then sometime you got together with these students at NYU, and over a period of time, you let the work emerge through exploration. Can you talk a little bit about the process of making the company and making Alice?
Well, the company, when we started, were graduating students from the Tisch School. We ended up being together for, I think, 12 years. And what that production grew out of was, I wanted to be a theater director, not a film director, and not a TV director. So then a question was, well, what is essential to theater? How is theater different from film and different from TV? And I had wanted what I call an actor who can fly. I literally wanted an actor who could fly. I wanted an actor whose body could be the source of light on the stage. Now, of course, when I thought of that, it didn't make any sense. It was just a subconscious metaphor. How the hell could you do that? But when suddenly I had no board of directors, no theater, no stage, just a tiny room and a book called Alice in Wonderland, I started being intrigued by the challenges of Alice goes down a rabbit hole. But how do you do that if there is no rabbit hole? What's the hole look like? What does her falling look like? If you have a caterpillar sitting on a mushroom who becomes a butterfly, how does the caterpillar transform into a butterfly with no change of makeup, no change of costume? And what is the mushroom he's sitting on? If you have a croquet game, like the Queen's Croquet, but you have no mallets, no wickets, only actors, how do you create croquet balls and mallets and wickets out of the actors' bodies? And then when Alice has made her way through this nightmare, which John Lahr, the critic, called a parable for youth during the Vietnam War, how does Alice go up a rabbit hole that isn't even there? Which is why it took 2 years just to figure out those technical questions. And if the body of an actor is going to be the source of light on the stage, how do you do that?
Was there a moment where, because I could imagine that the guy who directed Becklek or had fire engines come on the stage and firebogs could have done an Alice.
Only one fire engine.
Okay, one fire engine, excuse me. I don't mean to overstate. But you know, where I could
You've got into the bad habit of overstating by spending too much time with me.
Yes, I've learned from the master. But you could have made an Alice that was filled with, you know, condom-covered totem poles. And
right.
So was there a moment that you were like, I'm done with all of that? Or did it come out of necessity? How did that shift happen?
I think the shift happened because we don't in the theater, we don't tend to think that a director or a company has different stages in their work. The way Picasso has different stages, Matisse has different stages. And I had just painfully, disastrously worked my way through that flamboyant period of my work and needed to do something different, where I said, why I suddenly needed an actor who could fly, who the hell knows, but I did.
And where does Grotowski come into this process and this moment historically for you?
Well, Grotowski, I went to the Edinburgh Festival and saw one of Grotowski's works 12 times. And I realized this wasn't just a great director, this was the Michelangelo or the Leonardo of theater. And I think on some level, his work will never be surpassed. And I knew I wanted to work with him. There's an interesting story about that in the book. But working with him, I learned a series of very arduous, very complex physical exercises for the actor, which any of you can, if you haven't read Towards a Poor Theater, one of the Bibles of the theater, you can find talk of those exercises in his book. And I was able to use those to develop my company. We used those exercises for 2 years. every day for 2 years. And then once we'd used them and used them to make Alice, I threw all the exercises away, went to Tai Chi for the training, and wanted to find silence instead of action.
And what about your process? Well, silence. Say more about silence. How did that figure into the work? How did it figure into the working process?
Well, the production was wildly vocal and wildly physical. And there was this Indian gentleman, after we'd been running for 2 years, who was brought to see the production. And he said to me, this was the only piece of constructive criticism I've ever received. He said, oh, this was such a beauty. Why are you laughing?
Well, because I remember stories of other constructive criticism, but I'm not going to contradict you. Far be it from me to hold your words accountable. No.
Especially they were exaggerations. Well, this is the one that I remember the most, because this one question changed my work for the rest of my life. He said how much he liked the production, how stunning the acting was, how brilliant the choreography was. He said, the only thing I don't understand is why is the work so noisy? And that was like dropping a stone into the water with many reverberations. And from then on, my work was very quiet, quiet to the point that when we did one of Wally's plays, The Designated Mourner, I was thrilled that some actors came from the actor's studio, and they went back to the studio and they said, oh, it's wonderful work and it's amazing work, but it isn't acting, because they couldn't see it was acting. It was so simple. Like Matisse, some of Matisse's drawings would just seem like a line. They suggest everything.
Yeah. Well, that's something, and I've said this to you before, but not in this company. One of the things that strikes me in thinking back to the Alice as I can remember it, but especially with your Uncle Vanya and Master Builder, is that they are in a sense quiet and super simple pieces, but each choice in that simplicity feels like the distillation or the perfect choice that could only have been found over years and years of exploratory work. So it feels improvisational, and it feels like we're just in a rehearsal of Uncle Vanya, which we kind of are, or we're just in a townhouse where they're working on Master Builder. But then each moment is absolutely selected, curated, refined, and right for the text. Is that something you aim at, or is that just what comes out of the years of work?
Years of work. If you work on a scene where a character says, hi, honey, I'm home. That's the dialogue. Hi, honey, I'm home.
May we never work on that scene.
But if in one improvisation you've been fired before the scene, hi, honey, I'm home, it's going to have one texture. If your mother has just died, it's going to have another. If you won the daily double at Hialeah, it'll have yet another. And if over 14 years, we rehearsed, of course, the Master Builder on and off for 14 years. If you have tried every conceivable form of hi, honey, I'm home, then under the line, hi, honey, I'm home, are layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning. So that whenever you come onto the stage on any given night, without even trying, there's a huge subterranean meaning under just that phrase. And if you find every line of a play that way, that's how it works.
Yeah, I think that reminds me how I've long seen your work as being so your directing work so writerly, because it feels like the draft after draft after draft, and you don't see those drafts in the final distilled vision.
Right.
You just feel them there. And the weight of that experience and those decisions and that perfect diction really shows.
Yeah, it's like when you're drawing, if you have a really good eraser who becomes your dearest friend in the process of drawing, you may not be able to see the lines that have been erased, but it's there somehow on the page.
Yeah, it really is glacial in that way, isn't it?
Yeah,
so that you see just the top. So because we're among brilliant colleagues, and I want to allow lots of time for questions, as Patricia suggested, I just want to ask about a couple other things and then move to questions. So those of you who are hanging with us, if you have questions formulating and you want to be thinking towards that, please do. And Patricia, shall we do this we'll do it by voice rather than by chat, right? Because we're all—
Absolutely. If folks need to use the chat, I can go ahead and voice those questions.
Okay, great. But before we get to that, I want to talk about two things in particular, because I think they'll be of impact for this particular group. One is simply the touring life of the Manhattan Project. Because I know that so many of our ensembles in NET really struggle with the touring piece or rely on the touring piece. What was that touring life? You built it for 2 years and then toured for how long?
We toured for the rest of the 12 years, as well as performing in New York and giving workshops. We performed all over the States, France, Persia, Italy, India, we went everywhere.
A favorite touring story?
Well, what comes to mind is when we were playing at the Spoleto Festival, the director Visconti came to see it, Alice, and liked it a lot. And since my favorite director in the world was Fellini, I said, could you ask Fellini if he would come to see the work? He said, sure. So I get a letter from Fellini saying, dear Mr. Gregory, I hear your work is excellent, but I fear I must decline because my nightmares are hard enough to deal with, let alone yours. So he never came.
And did you learn anything that might be pass-onable about the life in tour? I mean, anything that any wisdom about how to tour, or
no, I'd say that a lot of the people that wanted us to tour were crooks and charlatans, and we needed somebody to protect us from the sharks. So my wife Chiquita created with Richard Schechner the group of experimental theaters, which was to make sure that we weren't gypped on tour and to make sure that the spaces were the right kind of spaces. But I don't know if my experience of touring is that valuable, because the world was so different. I don't know if it's the same today, but there were theater festivals, just as now there are film festivals, in almost every city in the world. So there were a lot of offers and a lot of opportunities to tour, and there was a National Endowment of the Arts that gave you enough money to perhaps tour.
Yeah, I remember, I mean, that was a big thing, even in the States, college festivals. I got to see so much of the work of that time just by going to the New Theater Festival in Baltimore or Michigan, Ann Arbor, or wherever. You could see that work. I guess
I will say this. If you were performing for an audience that didn't speak English, you could tell, quite shockingly in a way, any moment that wasn't communicating, because you didn't have the backing of language. Yeah. And so we could go back to rehearsal and try to make that moment clear in a way that any people could understand. That was very helpful.
Yeah, that's great.
Todd, we do have a couple questions.
Okay, give me like 2 more minutes. And then
Okay,
I'll turn to the
gotcha.
questions.
Okay, let me know.
So I just want to underscore something that Andre mentioned for everybody, for those of you who don't know, because as someone who was sort of coming of age at this point, every month in the drama review, there was an ad for something called a bunch of experimental theaters. And they were Mabu Mines, the Manhattan Project, the Performance Group, Shalico, Theater X, I think in Milwaukee. There were a bunch. And
Richard
hence
Foreman.
the name Richard Foreman and Hysterical. And I have long thought that in a kind of really beautiful way, that was a forerunner of NET. And even though they came out of sort of different impulses, but that thing about gathering together to protect one another was a really beautiful thing. And then last of my questions, I want to build on both Patricia's introduction and your mentioning both Vietnam and the last election, because one of the things that we didn't really cover too much in the book, but we've talked about a lot, was your activism all those years. And, you know, I know that Vietnam kind of was another nail in the coffin of your relationship with your father for a time. And I know that you continue to raise money and protest and write. And I just wonder, like, where has activism sat in your life, and how, if at all, has it connected with your theater work?
Oh, that's a good question, which I'm not sure how to answer. Well, I can't really get out in the streets much anymore because I've got a bad knee, so it's hard to walk. But even a few years ago, during Occupy Wall Street, I was going to my osteopath who was on Wall Street. And when I got out of the subway, I saw that police were beating demonstrators with billy clubs. So I started shouting. I guess I was 80 or something at the time. I started shouting, "Fascist pigs, fascist pigs." So the cops started walking on me, and the young crowd started chanting, "Leave the old man alone, leave the old man alone." You know, I raised a lot of money for Biden and for Democratic senators. I'm always signing petitions. But of course, in a way, I guess, wouldn't you say that political activism on a certain level is for the younger?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you were very active as a younger person. You were active in the Vietnam protests and then anti-nuclear proliferation protests. You know, your relationship with Howard Zinn has been of real interest to me, and in particular, how he put your work in context in terms of, you know, activism. Can you just tell about that?
Well, I'm always asking the questions, obviously, because I am very political. And much as I admire Biden, I think we're still in the midst of a national civil war. And I still think there are great threats to our democracy in America. So I'm not sure how to deal with that. I was very active against the Iraq incursion. But when Bush was elected for the second time, Cindy, my wife, and I, incidentally, Cindy made a terrific film called Before and After Dinner, or André Gregory, Before and After Dinner. I don't think you could see a better film on the theater process. See that.
Yeah, you can actually see the only surviving clips of the Manhattan Project there.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And we went to Howard, despondent that Bush had been elected a second time. Said, "We don't know what to do, Harold. What do we do?" And he said, "Well, you can always do the obvious things. You can contact your representative. You can march, but he said, and this was very surprising from somebody who I think had marched with Martin Luther King. He said, make your art. In times of darkness, art brings light. So make your art, everybody.
Yeah, there you go. So let's open to questions. So I think
Wonderful.
Julie, is that what you're saying is first?
Julie is first, yes.
Hi, my name is Julie Rozier. I have a company called Red Thread Commons that is turning 17 on May 6th, and hardly anyone knows about it. So I really appreciate your message of keep it going, right? Keep doing the work. Sorry, my dog. But my question is about Tai Chi, which has been incredibly important to my theater practice as well. And I learned about it in acting class in New York City. And I just wanted to see if maybe you could say a little bit more about how the energy moves through the body, and if you've applied that all with how the energy moves in the audience and on stage, or how it showed up for you beyond the silence. And I'll mute myself so you can't hear my dog now.
You know, I don't know. I can't remember. But I do have an important response to you. Didn't you say you were still unrecognized or still not noticed? When I was on my first honeymoon, there was a Frenchman there who showed us a pink jade elephant the size of a thumbnail. And within that little elephant were 12 or 14 smaller elephants. One Indian man had spent most of his life creating that for God. There are Romanesque cathedrals in France where behind the architecture, there are angels that no one will ever see. And they've been created as a gift to God. And the belief was they would have some kind of an effect. So I would say, forget about who's watching or not watching, just keep making it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So Patricia has a question from Teresa.
Yes, and excuse my French pronunciation, Andre. But thank you, Andre and Todd, for your inspiring and entertaining book. Question for Andre, wondering if and how Antonin Artaud, am I saying that correctly, influenced you, especially now that you are drawing? So talking a little bit about your painting, and how do you see your drawing process in relation to your theater process?
Oh, and you're talking about Artaud, right?
Artaud, sorry, thank you.
Okay. No, I just wanted to be clear that that's what it was, yeah.
You know, I know there's a relationship, but I don't know what it is. I couldn't possibly have been
Come here, buddy.
Julie,
What?
would you mute?
No barking.
Julie?
I'll
Okay,
try to
thank you.
mute on my
All
end.
right, there you go.
I couldn't possibly have worked in the theater for 40 years and have it not affect the drawing and the painting in some way. But what I've found amazing about painting is in the theater, your task is to see. The actor is doing something. What is the actor doing? What are the reverberations of that moment? Now, in painting or in drawing, we tend to think, before we learn how to do that, we tend to think, oh, trees are green. But trees are not green. Trees are dark green, light green, mauve, with a little pink. So it teaches us how to see. And seeing is an extremely important attribute, not just for theater, but for the world in which we live. Wally Shawn is always able to see what is coming down the pike. In The Designated Mourner, he saw fascism coming to America in the early 1990s. In Grasses of a Thousand Colors, he could see climate change coming way before there was talk about climate change. So the ability to see without prejudice is very important no matter what you're doing. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I-
We did have a question via email
Yeah,
to this beautiful group. I don't know if you can see the group in your purview, Todd. There's a group that's watching as well.
yes, I
And
do. Under James.
there you go. They're
James's
waving
name.
here. So they've been watching with their company, New World Performance Lab, My Dinner with Andre and the Vigil, and they were just wondering. I know you already spoke about Grotowski, but I didn't know if they wanted further more info. So if anybody in that group wants to voice a question, we're happy to go further. If you have want further thoughts, I think they're a little far from the camera, so just
Somebody's coming. Somebody's coming towards us.
Okay, wonderful.
Here we go. Hello.
Hi. Hello, Andre. Hi, Todd.
Hello.
We're here at New World Performance Lab, and Jairo Cuesta behind me. And we just wanted to know, Andre, if you could talk a little bit about how the paratheatrical work and experience with Grotowski influenced your later work or continues to influence your life.
I don't think in any way at all. I'm not being sarcastic, but it's a very good question. Well, I guess it had an influence in me because the paratheatrical work, of course, was work not for an audience. And Grotowski was one of the great masters of process. So I guess it taught me to keep listening to what was within and to follow my heart. Grotowski was ruthless about psychological truth. And I think that had a big influence on me. Even with my wife, I have to be truthful.
I mean, there's also a professional, this is not the question. I'm aware this is not the question, but I think that at your descriptions of those paratheatrical events and your work with them became very important in the telling of My Dinner with Andre, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yes, that's
somehow
true.
it stayed. Yeah.
And in fact, that's a wonderful example you bring up, Todd, because if we follow our heart or our impulse, our instinct, we can suddenly find ourselves saddened, lost, riding around the Sahara on a camel, thinking, what the hell am I doing with my life? What is this? Why am I doing this? Who is it for? But if you do that with enough conviction and enough tenacity and enough perseverance, one whole experience in the Sahara can create 2 lines of dialogue in My Dinner with Andre. And even though the last thing in the world you would think as you were being buried alive or driving a camel across the Sahara, oh, this is going to be a movie. You never know. Follow your heart.
Yeah. And I would think too, just sort of reflecting on your experience as I know it, is that those things you describe, the being in the desert or being buried alive, to a certain extent, you're there with other people, but the paratheatricals, you are really there confronting other people in a very emotionally as well as sometimes physically naked way. And so there is a real an underlying sense of connectedness that I think plays out through your work, through the kind of family of your ensemble over the years. Would be my...
Yeah, I love to be with people, as you know.
Yeah.
And now I'm drawing and painting all by myself. Why am I doing that?
Why?
It's what I'm doing next.
Well, you know, it seems when I've watched you rehearse as well, and seen you in the room, and even when I first heard about you 40 some years ago, it was like André just sits quietly and watches. He listens very attentively. He watches. It's the opposite of how we think directing happens. You know, the image of the director on her feet, kind of moving people around and making things happen. It is more like drawing. It's more like waiting for the next line, or making a mark, or being in a forest with people and waiting for the next impulse, or the next hive, or the next thing. So
well, of course, also, I think when we wanted to make a movie of the Master Builder, I took Wally and Julie Haggerty up to, who was that director?
Sidney Lumet.
Yeah, we up to Sidney Lumet's living room, and he was very, very impressed by the work. And I asked him if he would direct the film, and he said, "Oh, André, I can't do that. I'm 84 years old." So now, when I'm 87 years old, it might also be no longer appropriate to be out looking for money, out looking for spaces, dealing with 12 psyches at the same time. Maybe, you know, like Winnie in Happy Days, I'm just drawing back a little bit.
Well, I hope the earth doesn't come up and swallow you.
Yeah.
Way it does with Winnie. Thank you. Thank you all. I want to turn this back to Patricia. But André, I know this is our last conversation, public conversation for a while, probably till the paperback comes out in the fall, unless we dig something else up. But I really wanted us to talk in the presence of our net community, because it's just, this is the family. This is part of, and you are at the roots of this family tree. So
thank you, Todd, for leading us today and for this beautiful conversation. Folks, we are also want to save the date for our upcoming Net Town Hall. We are going to talk about moving forward together post, hopefully, knock on wood, post-pandemic, Tuesday, May 4th. Please RSVP on our website. We'll drop a link in the chat there. We also have Pay What You Can membership still, so please join Net at any price point you're able. Come engage with us on social media, and just thank you for being here today. Have a great, fabulous weekend, you all. I'll just play some music so we can wave at each other on the way out.